Hello, all. This is The Wandering Eye. I just wanted to talk a little bit about a book that I find particularly interesting that pertains to the Christmas season and that I think relates a lot to the idea of rootedness that I talked about in my previous video as one of the major themes that I want to focus on with this channel. It's not a novel that is originally from the Southern tradition. However, it does come from a tradition of landed aristocracy, and it is just in general very conservative in its message and its purpose. It's called Old Christmas by Washington Irving, who was from New York, but this is the version that I have. The illustrations in that version are by Randolph Caldecott. They are absolutely fantastic, and there are tons upon tons of them in this particular edition. I would highly recommend getting a version that has Mr. Caldecott's illustrations. They massively enrich the experience of reading the work. But in essence, what the story is just Irving in the character of Geoffrey Crayon, because it originally comes from the collection of stories called the Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, recounting an experience of Christmas celebrated in the English countryside at a an aristocratic estate, according to the old traditions that were even in his day perishing or had largely perished already. Uh, I believe that it was published in 1875. So this is well after A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, but it's one of the two stories that really led to the revival in Christmas in the way that we conceive of it as having traditionally been celebrated today. Um, the main reason I want to talk about this work is because it revolves around this idea of the family seat, the household, the patriarchal home of a particular family. And the reason why this is interesting to me is because I think that it's the most vibrant, concentrated embodiment of the idea of rootedness. Uh, the story takes place at Bracebridge Manor, which is, again, it's this landed estate. It's this Jacobean hall uh, of the Bracebridge family, and the chief character in the story, outside of the narrator, is the squire, who is the patriarch of the Bracebridge family, and he's a particular fan of all of these traditional means of celebrating Christmas and all of the games and just little quirky rituals and things that are part of the celebrations. And he's the patriarch of this family, and he's kind of the beating heart of everything that goes on in this household, which is the center not only of the family, but also of the local community. The reason why I find this so interesting is because I am from a very large family. I'm the youngest of several dozen cousins just on one side of my family. Uh, and my parents were a lot older than most of my peers' parents as a kid, and their parents were a lot older than most of their peers' parents as a kid. So I grew up with a set of my grandparents who were uh, more of an old world mindset. Um, there's there was a place in my family that I would have considered the family seat. And it was my paternal grandparents' home. It was a farmstead that my grandfather and my great grandfather had built that started as a chicken coop. And that was the place that I remember going to growing up to visit my grandparents. And there would always be kind of this entire solar system of relations near and distant with whom I had relatively little acquaintance, who I would encounter when I went to visit my grandparents in this farmhouse. And uh, just all of the stories and all of the things that go along with being part of a genuinely rooted, expansive family. And my family is scattered across multiple states, very scattered, pretty much across the entirety of the continental United States. And nonetheless, any given branch of the family would every once in a while make its way to the family seat and spend time with the patriarch and the matriarch of the family and interact with other cousins and aunts and uncles and on and on. I gather that this is very much not the experience of most people in my generation, especially. I think that it was quite normal in previous generations. And I'm interested by the question of what impact the loss of this actually has on our understanding of our country, our understanding of ourselves, our understanding of our families, um, and our understanding of history. One of the things that Irving talks about in Old Christmas is it's on pages 4 and 5. He says, "It is a beautiful arrangement, also derived from days of yore, that this festival, which commemorates the announcement of the religion of peace and love, has been made the season for gathering together of family connections and drawing closer again those bands of kindred hearts which the cares and pleasures and sorrows of the world are continually operating to cast loose, of calling back the children of a family who have launched forth in life and wandered widely asunder, once more to assemble about the paternal hearth, that rallying place of the affections, there to grow young and loving again among the endearing mementos of childhood." We've grown up with this idea as a culture in recent generations that, home is where the heart is. And, a house is just a place full of stuff and it has no real lasting significance. I think that this is pretty reflective of how we view our country broadly. As the saying goes within conservatives, my generation, we're a nation, we're not an economic zone. We are a country, not an economic zone. We're not just a place full of things to be used in a utilitarian fashion and discarded or uh, just discounted as purely material and insignificant. One of the things I love about the story of Old Christmas is that Washington Irving doesn't believe in any of those modern platitudes. He doesn't espouse any of them. Of course, he's operating at a time when kind of on the threshold between the old world and the new world and the way that they thought about things. But, every room, every part of the house was imbued with history. It was filled with patrimony. It was filled with the relics of previous generations of the family. It was filled with uh, heirlooms. I don't think that very many people in my generation got to experience what it was like to grow up in a family that had a heart, that had a center of its solar system, that all revolved around one household and could therefore operate in somewhat of a collective capacity that could interact with itself, where individuals within the family had to do with everyone else in the family in a way that wasn't just one to one, but that was genuinely collective, that was rooted in stories and memories and uh, family history, genealogy, and just a genuine possession of one's place in the world. That we are this being that emanates out from this rooted place. Nowadays, I don't know the statistics, but I know that it is very common for individuals to move essentially in accordance with career opportunities, to move many, many times in their lifetime. And I grew up with a lot of people who moved in and out of my school district, in and out of my community, uh, pretty rapidly, and who had come from a history of moving between schools and communities and states. And that is just completely alien to me and completely spiritually vitiating. I don't think that it is in any way good for us to do that. And this is a place where we kind of get into that corner of the discourse which is critical of capitalism. Um, I know within the last month or so that the comments that Ben Shapiro made about basically if you can't afford to live where you grew up, then you should move. You know, that, oh, we've grown up with this idea that you have a right to live wherever you grew up, but if you can't make it there economically, if you cannot prosper there financially, then you should leave and you should chase the opportunities that the macroeconomic environment affords you in some other place. I think that that is a genuinely idiotic take that is completely inhospitable to the prospect of preserving a country and perpetuating a nation. I think that culture comes from those places in the world that uh, have remained not stagnant, but have stayed still, have stayed put, have been rooted in a place with a people who have a loyalty to that place. Uh, and it is in the unity of people and place that these memories, that these collective uh, memories and just this capacity to recall the past and to make it real and operative within the present, and therefore to preserve it into the future as the inheritance and the collective memory of a people, as the tradition and history of a people. That does not come from chasing the promises of the market. That does not come from moving in accordance with perceived opportunity on a material basis. And I think that that's the biggest thing that they landed. And I mean, in the case of Old Christmas, the aristocratic approach to life has to offer is this is how one truly possesses a nation. This is how one truly possesses a place. Uh, to genuinely be of it and from it and in it in a vibrant way, and to be so rooted as to discount the prospect of leaving. I I don't know how we get to a place where that is more possible on an economic basis, but I do think that insisting upon it and making it work to the greatest degree that it is possible to do so, whenever it is possible to do so, has to be the beginning of a shift in the way that conservatives go about conserving things. You cannot conserve anything on a societal scale when every individual sees themselves as an individual and is constantly uprooting themselves from their networks of connections and relationships, from their community, from their place, and moving somewhere else to which they are wholly alien. Um, and I think that this is one of the greatest criticisms that can legitimately be leveled at the free market, is that it does not countenance anything's ever being sequestered away from it. It demands that the pot be perpetually stirred, that resources and capital and labor be consistently returned to usefulness and not allowed to lie still, and to engage in the process of culturation. And I'm just very, very dissatisfied with that way of things. And I think that if we are ever to have our nation again, we will have to learn to truly possess it and uh, not to hold it so lightly as we have, and to abandon it at a whim in the face of brighter prospects someplace else. Because the fact of the matter is that you can never have that portion of your life which you have spent in a given place back, and you will never be so much from whatever place you moved to as you would have been from the place that you came from if you had only stayed there. Um, so I do have a couple other sections from Old Christmas that I found interesting and I would like to quote. Um, one of them that I found especially interesting was a part where Irving is talking about the rural and rooted nature of the English as a people, uh, in the way that that affected their outlook. He says the English, from the great prevalence of rural habits throughout every class of society, have always been fond of those festivals and holidays which agreeably interrupt the stillness of country life, and they were in former days particularly observant of the religious and social rites of Christmas. It is inspiring to read even the dry details which some antiquarians have given of the quaint humors and burlesque pageants, the complete abandonment to mirth and good fellowship with which this festival was celebrated. Um, and he says later that it it united the the upper and the lower classes, the aristocracy and the peasantry, or uh, the aristocracy and laboring class, the landholders and those dependent upon that land which they held. Uh, I live in a community which I would consider to be essentially aristocratic in the way that it is operated, in that there are a few families that exercise an extraordinary degree of influence over the commerce and social interactions within the community, and um, they get a lot of negativity and consequence of that from people who feel that their influence is unwarranted. But they've been in the community for a very, very long time, and they are committed to keeping the community alive. I firmly believe that small towns in America fairly invariably perish if they do not have particular families which are devoted to their uh, sustenance, uh, who make the decision to remain there and to uh, keep their fortunes there for good or ill, in good fortune and in bad fortune, uh, in order to truly be the stewards of this community and this thing that is something other than uh, just an overnight community, just a sleeper community, as many suburbs are, where everyone who comes and goes in and out of it, they're just looking for the best real estate available for the price that they can afford at a given time, at a given point in the market cycle. And they just want proximity to some other place to spend all of their time and effort and energy and resources. And they just need somewhere that they can call their home to sleep and to put their stuff. That's not a home. That's not a community. It's not a place. Uh, it's purely utilitarian and it's inhuman. And I think that on an individual level, on a familial level, on a societal level, having communities and homes that are true communities and true homes, that are the aggregate of individual and familial interactions over the course of generations, that is how nations are built. That is what nations are. Places and people that are inextricably united. And we can see, for instance, uh, in the case of Socrates in Athens, He was offered the choice essentially of uh, death by poison or exile. And he chose death rather than exile because to leave Athens, to be estranged from his home, from the only community to which he bore any allegiance, with which he had any connection, um, that was in any way ever capable of being truly his community, to be estranged from that would be worse than death. I feel the same way. I do not feel an alien in my home, in my community, in my family. If I were to be forced out, if I were to be forced elsewhere, I would feel to be deprived of a great share of what I perceive to be the purpose of my life and the role that I have to play on a multi-generational basis. It is to keep my family here, to have a family here, to contribute to those things around me which are truly pertinent to me, which are truly mine, to which I have any claim or any duty. My duty is not to wealth, it is not to prosperity, it is not to the broader market, it is to my family and my community. And uh, we have to get back to believing that on a societal level. Um, there are other aspects of the story that are worthwhile, but I've rambled for quite a long while at this point. Irving does explicitly talk about something that I mentioned before I brought up his work, where he's talking about the master of the manor, who they call the squire, um, in the story, and he says it was really delightful to see the old squire seated in his hereditary elbow chair by the uh, hospitable fireside of his ancestors, and looking around him like the sun of a system, beaming warmth and gladness to every heart. What is lost when one no longer has a hereditary elbow chair or a hearth of one's ancestors? I don't think that we understand or can put into words what it means to be dissevered from the through line of history, the through line of patrimony, the through line of true familial and community connection. But I will say that in my own family, when my grandfather passed away and then my grandmother passed away, and we no longer had that family seat, I had an uncle who was essentially next in line to be the patriarch of the family. And he was desirous to turn what had been the family seat into sort of a family museum, so that it could remain a part of our collective interactions with each other and just a part of our family story and experience on a multi-generational basis, as it had been for 100 years. And he did not get that opportunity. Um, and now he's just aimless. He's a wanderer. He's deprived of purpose because historically that would have been precisely what he would have done. As the eldest son, he would have taken up the mantle of patriarch, and he would have become the son around which the rest of the family orbited, as we had his father. But for reasons of intrigue and modernity and the pace of life and our increasing and sustained separation from each other, it was felt and decided without really any convention that there was no more need for a family seat, for a patriarch. And now I do not see most of my family ever, and I expect I never shall, because we've been cast to the winds by forces of modernity and by the pursuit of prosperity. I consider this unacceptable. And I think that one thing which many men of my generation crave, even if they cannot articulate it, is precisely to be that center of gravity for their family, to be that person who is the center of a network of connections, of relationships, and can exist within a place which they can call their own. It's as they say that a home is a man's castle. What does that mean if there's no history to it? Then it's just you know, a foxhole. It's just a place to retreat to and sleep. And it's got no wonder to it, no life to it, no substance or significance to it whatsoever. And you can just as readily trade it for any other random place in the world. And it's the beginning of our atomization and our complete untethering from any sense of meaning, this destruction of the family seat. So I cannot well put into words the message of Old Christmas. It doesn't really have a message. It's very conservative in the sense that it's just talking about the way that life was lived in a way that is heartfelt and approving. And I don't think that it needs to have a moral. Uh, its moral is to have a home. Its moral rests in the obvious and evident goodness of that subject which it is treating of and the desirability of it. And it does not necessarily lambast or deride modernity or what was then the rising uh, attitude of modernity, but it does demonstrate the presence and the substance of something which modernity was growing increasingly to lack, and which it now lacks almost entirely to the point of oblivion, of forgetting that it ever possessed it. And I very much believe that we ought to return to that possession to the best of our ability. I think that if my generation does anything of substance for future generations of our respective countries, but especially in the South, which very much longs for and remembers this rootedness, this landed nature, this fundamentally agriculturally facilitated way of life, which is not transferable to some other patch of ground. Um, if my generation of men does anything, it must be to have families and to anchor them in communities, in places, to root them in the land and to establish these family seats, these real, genuine, full, vital, vibrant homes, and to begin the histories of them. Because these are things which existed for every prior generation, and we are uniquely deprived of them. And we must recognize and remedy that lack if we are to begin to have anything worth conserving in this country again. I'm sorry to have rambled so much as I did, but I would like to read a poem which is from a Southern author that touches somewhat uh, on these ideas, and it is by uh, Francis Ore Tickner, uh, writing in the wake of the Civil War about his home. It's called The Hall. I believe that his home, his plantation that he was from in Georgia was called Pagebrook. It begins, there's dust on the doorway. There's mold on the wall. There's a chill at the hearthstone, a hush through the hall. And the stately old mansion stands darkened and cold by the leal, loving hearts that it sheltered of old. No light at the lattice, no gleam from the door, no feast on its table, no dance on its floor, but glory departed, and silence alone, dust unto dust upon pillar and stone. No laughter of childhood, no shout on the lawn, no footsteps to echo the feet that are gone, feet of the beautiful, forms of the brave, failing in other lands, gone to the grave. No carol at morning, no hymn rising clear, no song at the bridal, nor chant at the bier. All the chords of its symphonies scattered and riven, its altar in ashes, its incense in heaven. 'Tis an ache at the heart, thus lonely to stand by the wreck of a home once the pride of the land. Its chambers unfilled as its children depart, the melody stilled in its desolate heart. Yet softly the sunlight still rests on the grass, and lightly and swiftly the cloud shadows pass, and still the wide meadow exults in the sheen, with its foam crest of snow and its billows of green. And the verdure shall creep to the moldering wall, and the sunshine shall sleep in the desolate hall, and the foot of the pilgrim shall find to the last some fragrance of home at this shrine of the past. That's all I have for today. I hope that you appreciated somewhat of what I had to say, and I'd be glad to hear your thoughts on this topic. And if you have any other recommendations that you'd like to make with regard to readings or works that treat of this theme, I'd be glad to hear them. Thank you very much for your time, and have a blessed day and a Merry Christmas.